All right, I think we're live. Let's see. I'm just gonna check the sound on my other phone here. See what we got going on. Let's see. Test, test. All right, we're good. We're good. All right, so I wanted to do another piece, sort of explaining more about Hydee, and I was like, you know what? Today's too good of a day, man. I gotta stay outside. So I figured I'll just stream on from the outside and add some notes here. And eventually, I'm gonna do sort of a more in-depth piece where I have all the different pieces of exhibits. I'll show them on screen for you guys, and I'll flash between each document, explain the document, explain the link, explain the context, and then move on to tying all the different pieces of context. But for now, I figured what better way to do this than just to keep talking and talking and talking about it. Eventually, through repetition, people will get the message. People will better understand. People that might not have been there from the beginning will get the whole context, right, from beginning, middle, to end. And so, what I wanted to do today is just sort of go through and explain a year and a half or so in review, right? Just take a step back and explain how it is that the city attorney of LA, Hydee Soto, is connected to all this, how she's tied in not just with the whole mess of the last year and a half of Scientology protesting, but various other high-level criminal activity by the government that she has helped cover up and has helped actually prosecute maliciously some of the other people that have dared speak out, whether it be people like Michelle McGuinness, whose court case, unfortunately, I don't have any updates for you guys. She's actually had a reschedule of her hearing on July the 24th, I believe. And so I don't have any updates for you. She was supposed to have her hearing on July the 2nd, but they rescheduled it, and so there was nothing to report on. Um, but anyway, getting back to a whole year and a half in review, right? The year and a half in review. So I want to take a step back and actually jump way, way back to December 2023. Around December 2023, LAPD Public Information Office, specifically over the Hollywood division, made a public statement talking about what their stance is on the protesters that were anti-Scientology and were streaming, be it on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and everywhere else. And what they actually said is really, really disturbing. So they talked about the protesters as, in a very particular language, they said the protesters were gang. The protesters, and this is LAPD making these statements, right? LAPD very early on in the whole mess of this whole anti-Scientology protesting. LAPD Hollywood Division Public Information Office specifically made a press release stating that all, not just one or two, but all of the people involved with protesting Scientology publicly are a gang. But not just any gang, a violent criminal gang, right? By their own account, they're saying that all these protesters are a violent criminal gang and that they should be treated as such. And that is a very important piece of information, because what that does is it ties into a context. It applies a context for how the rest of the events that transpired actually connect together, right? Whether it be the swattings, whether it be the repeated malicious prosecution of people like myself, people like Jay, the frivolous arrest of Cameron, the frivolous arrest of Josiah, the fact that Danny also got arrested. Um, and yet, when we take a look at the criminal behavior of the other side, we see very few in the way of arrests and actual criminal prosecution being done. nobody in the camp of Scientology, still to this day, has really been criminally held accountable for their acts that are, frankly, some of the lower end criminal behaviors, and yet with very clear and convincing evidence, like Wendell, for example, but yet charges not being filed, prosecutors completely dropping the ball, and detectives allegedly being assigned to investigate and follow up with completely, pretending like none of it ever happened, none of it exists, and as if somehow they don't have any context via very well documented video footage for, over a year. And so that's really where the context of all this is super important. And I remember Will actually talked about this quite a bit at the very beginning stages, and he showed the message, and you can actually see for yourself. I believe he captured on Twitter, and I know he captured on YouTube, actually showing the message from the Public Information Office. And they specifically said that all of the people involved in the protest were, quote, a violent gang. And so that same rhetoric was also immediately used by all Scientology agents towards anybody, whether it be a reporter like Eric LaVey, who is just simply that, a reporter, and who's a bystander recording on what's going on. Apparently, he's now considered by LAPD's very own definitions a violent gang member. Um, whether it be the harassment that Jessica received when she was trying to pursue a permit for an emergency situation following up on Chris being assaulted, and his case not being prosecuted despite the incident taking place literally just a block down from the Hollywood station. They wanted to get an emergency permit to protest on L. Ron Hubbard Way, and being given the runaround and essentially being harassed by unnecessary bureaucracy just for the sake of shutting her out. It's with that context that we have to remember to move forward on. And so we have a year and a half of the LAPD outright, right? And they're not the only agency, but the LAPD outright declaring that anybody involved with any of the protests is, in the eyes of LAPD, a criminal gang member. That's the context that's been applied to this protest, and that's really what led to um, the whole bad treatment of people who were getting swatted, people who were getting maliciously prosecuted. And so that's the context of all this. That's really the grand scheme of things. That's the perspective that law enforcement in LA has looked at the protesters with. And so that's what you need to keep in mind in the sort of year in review of protesting. The other thing to keep in mind is, for my cases in particular, right, they were never expecting somebody to follow up with the case. And not only that, but to actually not take a plea deal that involved incriminating themselves and involved any conditions with not being able to protest Scientology. They never expected somebody to come out of completely left field, completely stand up for themselves, and actually go far above and beyond that, and actually capture on a recording a city official admitting that knowingly that they knew. Oh, voice is a little too low. Here, hold on. Might be my gain. For some reason, the gain might be a little too low. All right. Let's see. Bum. Transmitter. Okay. All right. That should be better. So there we go. Hopefully that's a little better now. It was cutting out for some reason. So basically, what I was saying is to go back to that. they never expected, right? Hydee and her cronies never expected somebody to actually follow through with all this nonsense, and actually capture her on a recording, explaining, right? Explaining outright how guilty she is. And not only that, but to have your own trial prosecutor, Ethan Green, who was the person assigned to ultimately prosecute my case at trial, which I never made it to, uh, also sit there, right? And I have not only Ethan Green, um, but I have the uh, I think her name is Susanna Anthony, one of the supervising deputy attorneys, also in a meeting between my lawyer and her as a pretrial status update back in December of 2024, also admit that this case is totally bogus, that there's an extremely strong defense here, and that it frankly should have never gotten to even be charged in the first place. So you have two, right? You have two deputy city attorneys admitting that this is a complete waste of time, not only for the courts, but also a complete breach of ethical and legal responsibility that the city attorney has to bring forward legitimate cases, and not just because she's doing a political favor for a supporter that donated, that got her to the position that she's at today. And that's ultimately what happened, and ultimately why I won my case, because I didn't back down, and it had really little to do with the legal representation I had. The fact of the matter is, the law firm I had, to put it bluntly, was absolute hot dog water. I mean, the only reason why they even continue to press forward is because I have repeated records in writing, okay, of our exchanges back and forth, where they constantly did not listen to my wishes, right? Constantly did not listen to my wishes, constantly failed to follow up on very simple tasks like I had instructed them to, constantly failed to just do some basic diligence and actually truly fight for their client. And it's a textbook example of a situation where somebody's innocent, and whereas there's that saying, if you're going to court, you need a trial, you need a lawyer, but if you're innocent, you really need a lawyer. And so that's ultimately what my case was. And the reason why that's relevant is because if you actually take a look at Josiah's case as well, there was constant pressure, not only from Scientology side, but also from the side of the prosecutor, to somehow enmesh, right? Somehow enmesh and make his case about Scientology, and it had nothing to do with his case at all. His case had nothing to do with Scientology, and the failed demurrer of a misdemeanor versus a felony case, right? The failed demurrer. And ultimately, what ended up happening in Josiah's case is that he frankly got incredibly lucky, and I'm glad for it. But he got lucky that one of the star witnesses for the prosecution didn't show up. And so, essentially at the probable cause hearing, you got to drop it if your star witness isn't even there, and that's ultimately what happened. And I'm glad it did. But I fail to see. I fail to see any real advocacy coming from that firm. And frankly, aside from the money of staying with them, I wanted to see for myself and verify, right? I wanted to verify for sure. Was this going to be a firm that was actually as ill-mannered as has been alleged? Or are they actually going to see through the case and actually fight for their clients? Like a good lawyer, like a good legal representation for you is supposed to do. Are they actually going to follow through, not try to screw you over? Are they actually going to fight for you, right? And when you present them with wishes like, I want you to follow up on this task and report back to me, are they actually going to do it? Right? These are sort of litmus tests to verify the quality of that legal representation and what it is that they may or may not actually care to or not to do. And so that's ultimately what happened. You know, was it risky? Sure, but I needed to see for myself and verify the claims, and it's unfortunately true. I mean, the reviews don't mean crap. The fact of the matter is, in LA, there is no real legal representation that actually cares enough to combat cases against the city, against the prosecutor's office that involve utterly frivolous and meritless uh, charges. There just isn't one. The only way that any reputable law firm is even going to take a case to properly and adequately defend you is if you're what they call a quote perfect victim, right? If you've suffered a grave incident at the hands of LAPD where a family member has been, has had their life taken away. But it can't just be that. That's not enough. It has to be a very grotesque display of excessive force by the LAPD. Um, shot multiple times. Uh, you know, unarmed, clearly submitting to an order, a lawful order, and that's the kind of case that a so-called civil rights lawyer in LA will actually take a case and go to bat for you. But if you're not that air quotes perfect victim, they really won't. And the reasons for that are plenty. What I would say one of the most obvious uh, is the fact that they can't disrupt that stream of revenue for themselves. The city obviously feeds them cases. When you cut into your income like that, you can't. That's not good for business ultimately. And so that's ultimately the little incestuous sort of relationship that a lot of not just defense lawyers in general, but specifically in LA, that's just the nature of what it is that law firms in LA have with with this prosecutor's office. And that's just the city attorney side. I mean, the DA side, at least with the city attorney, um, you can reasonably get access to some of the clerks and other staffers in the city attorney's office. You can actually go into the city attorney's building and actually talk to staffers. You can't do that with the district attorney's office. First of all, their clerk is only available in the Clara Shortridge court. You can't even get access to the other court where their staffers are actually seated. That court is just across the way from the Clara Shortridge court, and they won't let you in there. They will not let you in there. Even some of the other staffer rooms that they have over at the Clara Shortridge Court, like the Victim Services Center, for example, those people are as helpful as a pile of crap, quite frankly. And I know because I went there myself and I verified, and not just once, not twice, but several times. And imagine if somebody as tenacious, persistent, and frankly a pain in the butt as me fails to get any sort of response. Can you imagine how families who have been utterly traumatized by a horrific incident are treated? I mean, obviously, all right, obviously, there's some really, really deeply effed up stuff happening at the prosecutor's office. And therefore, it should be without any sort of question as to why LA is in the state it currently is. It's that's just how it is. And so that's the real story of what LA is, how LA is run, and why I keep saying that the real narrative here, the real story, is really nothing to do with Scientology. It has nothing to do with Scientology. LA has so many criminal enterprises, and frankly, Scientology is not even at the top of that totem pole that they're taking an interest in. The fact of the matter, though, is that all these criminal enterprises only run because the prosecutor's office lets them. The prosecutor's office are the ones to file and are the only ones that can file criminal charges at the state level. They are the ones that are supposed to be enforcing the law and actually prosecuting not just violent criminal acts, but also acts of government corruption. So the enforcement of things like violations of the Brown Act actually falls under the district attorney's office, okay? That's the district attorney's office. That's the DA's office. and that's the newly appointed DA, Nathan Hochman, right? The city attorney's office, what they're supposed to do is when they get complaints of things like government corruption, whether it be Brown Act violations or whether it be Bain Act violations, like is the case with LASA and all the homelessness fraud, they're supposed to be escalating those matters not only to the DA but various other government agencies for further escalation of criminal prosecution, right? Consideration of prosecution. And the problem is, at the end of the day, the problem is who is the actual legal representation for the city of Los Angeles? Who is it? Well, it's the city attorney's office, right? Hydee Soto is the city attorney, and not just that, the city attorney is the legal counsel for the city of LA in every matter, okay? Except for when the city is being criminally indicted, like they are right now. Various council members, for example, Curran Price has various felonies that he's being prosecuted for, 10 felony counts of fraud. And he's not going to be the only one. I mean, it's just a matter of time before they get the rest of the council members that are involved in this giant homelessness racket, as well as the various other board leaders for the nonprofits that they serve on that help launder the money, that have led to billions upon trillions of dollars hemorrhaged that were supposed to be meant for the use of helping people who are homeless and are struggling, and none of that money is seen its way to actually helping them out. And so that's what the city attorney's office is supposed to do, and then the prosecution of that is supposed to be the district attorney's office, right? And so in my case, we have a city attorney who works and does political favors, has admitted it on the record, and even worse, you also have a FBI field office in LA that is also so corrupt, also terribly corrupt, that they have to bring special agents for the FBI that are completely far from the West Coast because they understand how utterly tainted, how utterly corrupt, and how utterly incompetent the local agency of the FBI here is, okay? That's the problem. That's the problem that you have all over the city of LA and the county of LA. You also have U.S. attorneys here in the field that are failing to prosecute some of these acts. And when it comes to, for example, the homelessness fraud, LASA has been around for years. All the fraud, the lack of data validation, and all this smuggling of homelessness, alleged homelessness programs that are supposed to make its way to actually help people that need not only just short-term shelter, but ensuring that they're no longer stuck in that cycle of poverty, right? No longer stuck in that cycle of poverty. They're not following up with it. They're not prosecuting. They're not arresting. They're just not doing it. And again, it's not like this has been unknown. Anybody that knows anything about how to read simple budgets, not even just the city, but at the county level, at the county audit reports that have been around for years, city reports on the budgets, and how they're paying, whether it be the bonds or other debts that are being taken, it's been clear for a very, very, very long time that LA has been city officials have been deliberately hemorrhaging money and laundering that money that's supposed to go to see its way to helping homeless people break the cycle of poverty, not just temporarily with shelters, but truly for, in their own words, right, in the permanent long term. And it's only going to get worse. And so it's an issue of, it's sort of a double, it's coming at you from two ends. On one end, they know, it's been known, and it's been very easily explained by various news agencies. People have come forward with their stories. People have made reports. And on the other part, you have a lack of enforcement right, from the DA side as well as the U.S. Attorney and the FBI local agency side to actually catch these fraudsters at the government level. And obviously, right, obviously, when you take a look at this highly organized criminal ring of laundering these trillions of dollars of homelessness funds, which are really nothing more than just um, very, very lucrative real estate deals. That's what they are. They're highly lucrative real estate deals. All sorts of land deals that again drive to the matter of where and how is the money in LA being spent and who is controlling ownership of those assets, and how is it that the return of the return on your money on interest over time is it being calculated? Is there some sort of proprietary interest rate calculator that you're using? Are you using uh, fair market value? Are you just, you know, making sweetheart deals where you're guaranteeing a percentage to certain corporations? That is the type of intentional lack of clarity that's existed for a while. And the reason for that is because you obviously have a city that is predominantly known where one of its biggest assets is its value in real estate. And if you don't know that about coastal cities, then really that's the first place everybody should be starting to look at, which is follow the money and what is the one of the biggest assets on a coastal city, especially for Southern California. It's the real estate. Real estate. Real estate, real estate, real estate. And the reason why it's in the trillions, right? The reason why it's in the trillions is because you have guaranteed, if you take a look at the most recent deal outlined by Matthew Szabo, okay, the CAO, the Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Los Angeles, you have 55-year-long deals being made where, again, the question is, how is it that your return on investment is being calculated? What are you using? What equation are you using to guarantee these sort of returns to your investors? Is it proprietary? Are you using some sort of um, fair market value? Are you basing it off of how long you expect certain units to be in service? What sort of guidelines, basis, and metrics are you using in order to build these alleged shelters? And how are you guaranteeing that they will be kept to a certain quality of service? Do you have a plan that each of these places will be staffed by a certain number of staffers? What sort of competency do these people need? Are you doing any sort of intake and due diligence to track the number of people using the services, at what times, what services? How are those people that are rendering the services being paid? How are you tracking the expenditures of those people that are allegedly rendering these services? What constitutes a bed? How many beds should a unit contain? What is the average cost that we're targeting towards when we're building a unit? And how are we going to make sure that we keep to that? That is the issue at hand here. That is the issue at hand, right? This is the easiest way to see how much fraud there is in the city of LA, and how tightly coupled the prosecutor's office is, specifically the city attorney's office, is in this whole mess. Because again, in all of these land deals, the legal representation for the city of LA is Hydee Soto. It is the city attorney's office. They're involved in every step of the way. Every stupid contract, every smart contract too, but every contract, every business negotiation, it is policy set forward by the mayor, and it is people at the city attorney's office that are litigating them and making sure that each of those contracts are signed and approved and delivered as such. And so that's the issue at hand here. And that's why really there's little to no faith, not only in just law enforcement, but just the overall prosecutor's office in LA. And that's the real story of what people need to understand, whether it be this protest movement or any other. That's really what you're up against. And so the next question becomes obviously, right? Well, how do you combat this? Right? Well, how do you combat this? Well, obviously, on one hand, there's social pressure. You know, the more people you have protesting, the more people that you have bringing attention to this, the better. But it can't just be any sort of attention. You have to understand how the system works. You have to actually understand how the process works, and you have to actually use that system as well as apply public pressure. It's not enough to just simply, make online content. You actually have to file complaints for what they call administrative relief, and then after that, when they obviously will not give you the time of day, and you've tried repeatedly, not once or twice or three times or 10 times, but 30, 40, 50 times, and that's gone on for quite a while, when you've shown and you met your burden to show repeatedly how utterly bureaucratic, but worst of all, how utterly corrupt it is, that's when you have to move forward and file lawsuits. You have to have the public pressure, you have to actually file complaints, you have to attend the meetings, and you ultimately, the last prong is you have to actually go and file lawsuits. And that's currently the step I'm at now, right? It's currently the step I'm at now. And so for me, honestly, it's been a great exercise to actually understand how is it that governments actually enact their criminality and try to get away with it, right? I've learned a hell of a lot just by going through this and sort of seeing how the sauce is made. And I'm thankful for it. Like, has it been stressful? Yeah, but I'm honestly, I wouldn't have traded any of this for anything. I've learned it's like they've made me as best of a litigator as I could possibly be without ever going to law school just yet. And the next step for me is actually going to law school. And ultimately, that's how this story of what people like Hydee thought was going to be just a one and done. We prosecute this guy, he takes a guilty conviction, and serves a condition to never talk about this one criminal enterprise. Completely blew that out of the water, and best of all, with the support of you guys, I was able to fund not only the law firm, but expose also a law firm that not only them, but frankly is a quite common theme of LA. There is no real good legal representation for civil rights lawyers in LA, unless again you're an exceptionally perfect victim with exceptionally grotesque circumstances. Law firms here will not take your case. They just won't do it. And it's for a number of reasons, but primarily because they don't want to cut off a main source of income by going against the city. And so that's the real story of Hydee Soto. That's the real story of LA. And that's how and why all of these major fraud enacted by government continue to go unchecked, right? I mean, on the Alliance versus City of LA federal suit, you had to have a federal judge, come all the way out from uh, Santa Ana, because every judge here federally had some sort of link, right? Had some sort of link to every city official and could not properly adjudicate the case as such based on all sorts of conflict of interest and impropriety. That's the level of crap that you're dealing with here. Um, that's the level of crap that we're dealing with here. Um, and the worst of all, at the end of the day, all this is being funded by the taxpayer. All of the representation that the city has to take now that its officials are being criminally charged, that representation by, for example, Covington and what is it, and Bloomingdale or Blumenfeld? No, Covington and Burlington, the firm that's representing the city on the federal case that the DOJ launched against the city for the sanctuary city policies. That is money being used by us, the taxpayer, us, the public. They're not paying out of their pocket for that. Um, Same goes for all the lawsuits against LAPD for all the crimes that they commit. The money is coming out of the city's general fund. That's not coming out of individual officers' pension or their fund. It's coming out of the general fund for the city. And that's the issue at hand here, right? You have public money being used to defend city officials when they do criminal acts, and ultimately it's repeatedly the taxpayer paying for it. And so, to wrap all this up, right? It's not going to be the last time that I talk about this, but to wrap all this up, the problem here at the end of the day, really for any sort of, you know, topic or movement that people have an interest in advocating for, the issue primarily will be the prosecutor's office, and then we're trying to work with policy and lawmakers to actually not only enact laws, but that are forward thinking, but then actually enforce them, meaning when they're broken to actually prosecute them. And I mean, how many times have we seen simple but consistent issues like the Brown Act being violated at every city council meeting, where people are deliberately not being allowed to give public comment? That's such an easy thing that I've written repeatedly complaints to just about every city agency, but they don't do anything about it. And so the only next step, right, is to sue the city and these officials in their official capacity, unfortunately, to make a point of it. But the sad part is the city will be using tax dollars to pay for the defense of that litigation. That's the ultimate conundrum here. Um, and again, you know, Hydee Soto reminds me of the corrupt mayor Tiffany Hendricks. I mean, Hydee does not have any shame in who she does political favors for. As long as you support her, she will do a political favor for you. That's the type of person that Hydee is. She will go out of her way to prosecute you if it means that her political supporters are satisfied. And it's exactly the reason for why Michelle McGuinness ultimately got fired as the head of the criminal prosecution branch. Michelle McGuinness came forward and explained how during her tenure as the director of the criminal prosecution branch, she saw all sorts of highly corrupt, highly malicious prosecutions by Hydee, decided to speak out about it, and then got fired for it. And right now she's seeking a unjust termination case against the city and Hydee. But guess who pays for all the legal defense for Michelle McGuinness's case, right? Obviously, Michelle McGuinness pays for her own representation, but all the lawyers that are defending the city, and there's about 10 of them, mind you, all of those folks are their salaries. There's about, I think, 6 private counsel and 4 deputies assigned from the city attorney's office. The private counsel, that money is being paid out of the city, aka the taxpayers. That's who's paying for that suit. All because Hydee couldn't bear a whistleblower speaking out about how corrupt she is. That's what it is. So yeah, it's just people don't understand, and you know, it's not enough. It's not enough to just say there's impropriety on the face of LAPD. You know, there's this constant meme here that I get. Truly, I understand a heck of a lot better now, where everybody says, you know, everything's the LAPD's fault. It's really not. You have a failure systemically by the prosecutor's office and at the LAPD's office. And it's made even worse when you have a person like Hydee Soto leading the city attorney's office. And what you need to understand about Hydee is that she comes from a highly it makes sense of how somebody as corrupt as Hydee would land in the position she's in with that much power. Based on the Michelle McGinnis discovery, we know that Hydee has a background not only as a banking lawyer, but working for the Arthur Andersen accounting firm. And the Arthur Andersen accounting firm was the same firm used by Enron, the highly corrupt company known for committing wide-scale fraud. So that's the person, right? That's the person who served as one of the lead counsels. And of course she did, right? Of course she did. But it doesn't just end there. If you take a look at her divorce case, you find out that she was sanctioned $250,000 for malicious prosecution in her divorce case with her ex-husband, Peter Gregora, where she was trying to subpoena basically anybody and everybody that she cared to, because just cuz, right? She suspects you, immediately that means you're guilty. Just the mere, sort of delusional take that she has on the world, that just because she suspects anybody of, doesn't even matter what, you're automatically somehow in her eyes guilty, and she'll prosecute you for it frivolously. And when you take a look, right, hats off to Peter Gregora for enduring what I think it's like over 8 years of a divorce case, spending millions, where she drew from the community fund, where when she was ordered not to, and just generally not supposed to, but she withdrew money from the community fund, let alone all the millions they dumped, let alone all the millions, the utter millions she hemorrhaged, not only on her part, but made Peter hemorrhage out of his own pocket for the legal representation in that whole battle. Like, this is the kind of person that Hydee is. She's not a good person. Like, she's an awful, awful person. She doesn't care. She will do anything for her political supporters, and she will come after you if you just so much as fart in her general direction, right? I mean, this is the kind of person that's leading the prosecutor's office. But again, according to all the Michelle McGinnis findings, but if you're a corporate defender, specifically of the developer kind, she will not prosecute you. She will not prosecute you if you're a developer, because she knows that's how the city gets huge sums of cash. That's what lines her pockets and the pockets of all of her political donors and supporters, and she won't prosecute them. She will not prosecute them. And when you take a step back and understand all of this corruption going on in LA, right? And the huge financial crisis that's happening in LA right now, it makes perfect sense for why, like it or not, regardless of your political opinions on it, it makes perfect sense why the DOJ would sue the city of LA right now on the sanctuary city policy. It makes perfect sense for why the DOJ is prosecuting the city of LA on the sanctuary city policy. Specifically 2 points, and I actually read the 21-page complaint. Point number one is that LAPD and other local law enforcement in LA County are supposed to send the DOJ reports of all the arrests, and particularly provide details on ones of people that might have any sort of immigration status relevance. So whether it be somebody that might have been naturalized, somebody that's still pending on getting their citizenship, it doesn't matter. When they're arrested, they're supposed to send that information over to the DOJ, and they haven't been. The second point that they make that is legitimate is that the city of LA has been instructing its staffers, as well as telling other businesses, to ban federal agents from going on public property, aka city property, to enact their duties. That is a textbook case of obstruction of justice. You can't ban, and you can't allow federal agents, you can't not allow federal agents to go on public property. You can't actively resist them. By the hand of the city, mind you. This is what they're telling their staffers and law enforcement to do. On those 2 counts on that specific suit, they will win. That's very, very easy win. The rest of the complaints outlined were frankly utter trash and had no real merit. But on those 2 points, those are legitimate points. Those are very legitimate points. And frankly, the only reason that suit was filed is because the DOJ knows the absolute dumpster fire that is the city of LA's budget right now. They're just looking to add on to that debt. That's really primarily what the strategy is, because they know. They know they're being kicked in the groin with all the money that's being hemorrhaged out by the city defending itself against all the homelessness fraud. All their council members and the prosecutor's office all taking a cut from all the various nonprofits, right? They know that there's a budget crisis, and they know that they have them on these 2 issues. They know they have them on these 2 issues. And so that's why it's been this whole political shit show in LA with all of the protests, the excessive use of force. Um, that's why that is. So yeah, I mean, that's the real story of Hydee. That's the real story of LA. And frankly, the only way that homeless people are ever truly going to get justice in LA, a story that I personally care much more about, is if somebody that is not involved with the government actually goes and takes their stories, organizes all the records that they have of their interactions while they were in any of these shelter programs, be it Inside Safe or otherwise, lines it up with dates, and gets to interview those people. And then and only then will an agency like the FBI actually go and prosecute the individuals, whether it be staffers at the nonprofits, the managers, as well as eventually working up to the city officials involved with the mismanagement and the money laundering in those schemes, as well as individual lawyers filing suit against the city for not serving and violating the people that they're alleging to help out. It's the only way. It's been going on for a while, but the fact of the matter is, that's the only way any of these people are ever going to get justice. There's just no way that the city attorney's office is ever going to give a damn. We already see that, and so that's what I wanted to come to you guys today with. And I'm just going to keep hammering the same point over and over and over again. And as always, if anybody has any more details they want to share, or if they have any, if they have any other information, you can always reach out to me via email. And I'd be happy to take a look at it. But like I said, I'm going to continue on this point of the corruption and the collusion of the prosecutor's office and the lack of enforcement and protecting of the people's rights, and the selective and malicious prosecution of anybody that dares, publicly criticize any of their political supporters. So with that, I'll leave you guys there. See you on the next one, and I appreciate it. Peace out.